Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Subliminal Analyzing. So, today we are going to be talking about how you should get your taxes done. I know this is something that a lot of people are working on right now, and so I wanted to provide a few helpful tips from somebody who worked in the tax arena for a little over 5 years. So, today we're going to be talking about how to get your taxes done and what methods you should use to do that. So if this is a topic that you're interested in, please stick around. And as always, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions specifically related to getting your taxes done, leave a comment below and I would love to fill you in. So the first step that you need to take in order to decide how you should get your taxes done is to understand the level of complexity of your return. Essentially, you're going to have around 3 levels of complexity just in order to simplify things. And those 3 levels are going to start at the simplest return, and then a medium level return, and then an advanced return. So the first level of return is going to be the easiest and most simple return. A return that I would consider a level 1 return is something that I would say that anybody who is comfortable with computers and reading forms would have an easy time doing by themselves. So the basic level of complexity for a return requires you to have 2 things. The first thing you're going to have is a W-2 form, and the second thing that you're going to have is proof of insurance. So if you have your W-2 form and you have your proof of insurance form, which is called a 1095-C form, that's going to show the coverage of insurance that you had throughout the year. Those 2 forms are really all you would need to do your tax return, assuming that was all you had. So if you just had a job, let's say you were in college and you just had a job, working at a grocery store part-time to get some additional spending money, and you had proof of insurance, that's all you would really need to get your tax return done. This is something that you could do on most online tax return websites. Things like TurboTax, TaxAct is one that I actually personally use. And I also believe that H&R Block has a online forum now. Those are going to be the simplest and quickest places for you to get your tax return done. And they're also typically free for anybody who's filing the simplest form. So if you have a level 1 return, I would highly recommend, if you're comfortable with computers and comfortable with forms, to look into doing it yourself. You could probably save a good chunk of money if you were to do it yourself. It depends on where you were looking at getting it done, but some of these locations that are supposed to be the cheapest actually end up charging you a lot more for getting your tax return done because of fees associated with electronic filing fees or other things like that. So be careful whenever you hear free, because it's not necessarily always going to be free whenever you're filing your tax return once you get all your forms put in. When you get to a level 2 complexity, when you have multiple forms, you may have your own business that you're running. You could have some itemized deductions, for example, donations to charitable organizations such as your church or any nonprofits. If you have any rental properties, these are small things that can add a lot of complexity to a return, and they're very common on tax returns. So if you have a level 2 return, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend doing it yourself, but if you're feeling very confident and if you've had any level of tax preparation before, you may be able to put it together. I would still recommend talking to a professional. At that point, you're getting to a place where you should probably seek the help of a CPA. They are going to know a lot more about the credits and tax forms that you'll need to fill out, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds when you're preparing your own tax return. So I would highly recommend, if you get to any point where you're not positive on something, go ahead and look for a local CPA in the area that you're in, and call them and see if they can have see what their pricing is, and see what you can do as far as getting your tax prepared by them. So once you get to a level 3 complexity, I would highly recommend not to even attempt doing it yourself. It gets to a level when you get to level 3 or advanced tax return. These are returns that, for example, would have a C corporation or an S corporation. Those actually require additional tax returns to be filed on your behalf, and those have to be completed before you can even file your personal tax return. So once that comes into play, it adds a whole new level of uncertainty to filling out the forms yourself. And most of the online forms that you can do, or online tax preparation services you have access to, most of those are not going to be as good as going and having it done and prepared for you. The other thing to keep in mind when you're getting your taxes done is to understand what it's actually costing you to get your tax return prepared. There's very different pricing structures depending on what locations you go to. I would always recommend going to a local CPA firm or tax preparer and just talking to them about what their pricing structure is. There's a lot of misconception about how much it costs to get your tax return at some of the bigger places. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people are actually paying substantially more to get their taxes done than they actually should be. You may be paying 2 or 3 times as much as you normally would to have your taxes prepared at one of the big firms that are the more popular ones like H&R Block or Jackson Hewitt than you would at a local CPA firm. So in addition to them charging more, you may be relying more on a computer for answers than you are for somebody who actually understands the tax code. And that's a very difficult place to be in when you're getting your taxes done, because you have to be able to bring that human element into and understand the credits that you're applying for, if it's something that you can even apply to your tax return. There's things like that a CPA will actually be able to provide substantially deeper level of understanding for, whereas when you're trying to fill it out on a computer program, that computer may not understand the actual situation that applies to you. So those are just a few of the tips that I had to help you understand how you can get your tax return done. So just a quick recap, I would say if you have a level 1 return, if you have a simple W-2 and proof of insurance, it's going to be very simple for you to do your return. I would highly recommend at least looking into doing it yourself and seeing what the cost is. It may not necessarily be free just because you're doing it yourself, but it could be one of the cheapest options that you have available to you. Once you get to an intermediate return, if you have multiple W-2 forms, a handful of itemized deductions, possible rental properties, or your own business, that's where you're getting to intermediate, and it's probably good to look into talking to a CPA, but not necessarily required. You could, if it's simple enough, you could handle putting it together and getting that information into one of the TurboTax or Tax Act types of websites. And then once you get to the advanced level, I would highly recommend sitting with a CPA and making sure that they understand all of your tax situations to make sure that you get the biggest bang for your buck. One other tip to keep in mind is to understand that just because you file your tax return early doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a tax liability, it's due. So let's say, for the sake of example, that I was to file my tax return on today, February 19. If I filed my tax return today and found out that I owed a tax liability of $1,000 and I start panicking because I don't have $1,000 right now, the fortunate part about that is I know 2 months in advance what my tax liability is going to be, because your liability is only due on the day taxes are to be paid, which is April 15, assuming that it doesn't fall on a Saturday or a Sunday. Because of that, I would always recommend trying to get your taxes done as soon as possible. it's always good to get your stuff in there early just in case there's something that's changed with the tax law. It allows the person that's preparing your tax return to have a lot longer time to review your documents and see if there's any special situations that apply to you that they may not have thought about if you brought your information into them at the last minute. Another good tip to understand is last minute for a tax preparing office is going to be anything past April 1st. Most of these CPA firms and local tax preparers, they're going to have clients booked out at least 2 weeks, and it's going to take them at least that time to get their tax return done. So I would highly recommend, even if you can't get in until April, make sure and call them and set up an appointment well in advance so they can make sure to have you scheduled and get your tax return prepared. And the final tip I have is to don't be afraid to ask questions. If there's something that you think might be applicable to you, then go ahead and ask your CPA or tax preparer and just see what they say. The worst that they could say is, no, that's not something that we can do anything with. But it's better to ask and not be able to use it than to not use it and find out 5 years later that you could have used it and saved yourself a lot of money. So those are just a handful of tips that I had to help you get through this tax season and get through it a little bit easier, hopefully. I would love to hear feedback from you. So if you have any questions about tax, please feel free to send me a comment down below, or if you want to direct message me, you can send me an email, and I would love to reach out to you and help you with any questions you have. Thanks for stopping by. And let's remember, let's always do better, even if it's just a little.